The battlefield was silent now, but the air still smelled of smoke and burned metal. Daniel Cross moved slowly between the broken machines and twisted armor plates, his boots crunching over shattered glass and empty bullet casings. The sky above was a dull red, the sun hidden behind thick clouds of ash, somewhere far away. The wind carried the sound of creaking metal, like a dying world groaning in pain. Daniel had come here looking for supplies, maybe fuel, maybe food. Instead, he found only destruction, the kind that told a story of a fight lost long before he arrived. Still, something kept him moving deeper into the ruins. A feeling he could not explain. It was then he heard it. A faint sound, soft, almost swallowed by the wind. It was not the sound of a machine, not the wind, not the shifting debris. It was a cry, not a human cry, but it was filled with fear and pain, all the same. He stopped, listening. The sound came again, sharper this time, desperate. Daniel adjusted the strap of his old rifle and moved toward it. Every step made the rubble shift under him, sending echoes into the quiet. He passed a burned-out transport, its hull blackened and smoking. The cry grew louder, and now he could hear another sound too, a softer, trembling voice trying to hush it. Pushing aside a twisted sheet of metal, Daniel finally saw them. A woman, clearly not human, sat on the ground, her back against the wreckage. Her skin was pale silver with faint patterns that glimmered even in the dim light. Her clothes were torn and dirty, soaked with blood from a wound on her leg. In her arms, she clutched a small child, no older than 6. The child's large, tear-filled eyes looked straight at him, unblinking. The woman's gaze hardened, even in her weakness. "Go," she said in a trembling voice. "They'll come back for us. And they'll kill you too." Daniel crouched down, keeping his voice low. "I'm not leaving you here," he said. The woman shook her head, her hair long and silver like her skin, falling over her face. "You don't understand. They want me alive, for slavery, for punishment. But my child, they will kill her." Her words were weak, but her fear was sharp and real. Daniel looked at the child, who was still watching him, silent now but shaking. The girl pressed her face against her mother's chest, as if trying to disappear. Daniel scanned the horizon. No movement yet, but the battlefield offered no real cover. If the people who hurt them were still nearby, they would find this spot quickly. "Can you walk?" he asked. The woman shook her head, wincing in pain. Daniel made his decision. "All right, then I'll carry you." He slung his rifle across his back and carefully slid his arms under the woman and her child. She gasped in pain as he lifted her, but did not resist. Her head rested against his shoulder, and he could feel her breathing fast, uneven. The child's small hands clung to his jacket, holding tight. Daniel moved quickly, his eyes scanning every shadow, every broken wall. He knew they couldn't stay in the open. He found a path between 2 collapsed buildings, leading toward what looked like the remains of an old cargo station. The walls were cracked but still standing, offering some shelter from sight. He set them down inside, leaning the woman gently against the wall. "Stay here," he said. The woman's eyes searched his face, uncertain if she could trust him. "What are you going to do?" she asked. Daniel checked his pistol, only 1 clip left. "Make sure they don't find you," he said. The child looked up at him, speaking for the first time. "Are you a soldier?" she asked in a small voice. Daniel paused, then shook his head. "Not anymore," he said. She stared at him for a moment longer, then whispered, "You smell safe," before hiding her face again. Daniel stepped to the edge of the ruined doorway, peering out. Far in the distance, he saw movement, dark shapes moving between the wreckage. The sound of engines drifted toward them, low and steady. The woman's eyes widened when she heard it. "They've found us," she whispered. Daniel turned to her. "Then we move, before they get here," he said. He pulled a piece of cloth from his pack and tied it around her wounded leg to slow the bleeding. "Hold on to your child, and don't let go," he told her. She nodded, her grip tightening around the girl. Daniel crouched down, offering his back this time. She climbed on slowly, pain in every movement. But she didn't complain. The child held on to her mother and Daniel both, small arms wrapped around them like chains. They slipped out the back of the cargo station, moving toward the shadow of the burnt forest beyond. The engines grew louder, and now voices joined them, rough, mocking voices that carried through the smoke. Daniel's pace quickened, every instinct telling him they were running out of time. The forest was still far away, but it was the only chance they had. As they moved, the child whispered something he almost didn't hear. "Please, don't let them take us," she said. Daniel didn't look back. "I won't," he promised, his voice low and certain. The burnt forest loomed ahead, its blackened trees standing like twisted bones against the gray sky. Daniel moved fast, his breath steady but his eyes scanning every shadow. The woman on his back was light, far too light for someone her size, as if hunger and fear had already drained her strength. The child clung to her mother and to Daniel's shoulders, small fingers gripping with surprising force. Behind them, the sound of engines rumbled like a storm getting closer. Daniel knew they needed somewhere to hide, not just for minutes, but for hours. Running forever was impossible with an injured woman and a child. The forest offered cover, but it was also dangerous. Predators lived here, and the blackened ground was littered with hidden holes and broken roots, but it was still better than the open battlefield. After a few minutes, Daniel found an old path, barely visible, half covered with ash. He followed it until he spotted the shape of a ruined building ahead. It looked like an old cargo station. Its roof, partly caved in, but the walls were still strong. He stepped inside, setting the woman down gently against a corner where the shadows were thick. She winced as her leg touched the ground, but said nothing. The child stayed close, her wide eyes flicking between Daniel and the doorway. Daniel knelt in front of the woman. "You need rest," he said. "That leg is bad." She nodded slowly, pressing her hand over the makeshift bandage he had tied earlier. "My name is Sirai," she said quietly, "and this is my daughter Lura." Daniel gave a short nod. "Daniel," he replied, keeping his voice low. Sirai looked toward the doorway, her eyes hard. "They will not stop," she whispered. "The raiders took our home weeks ago. They killed my husband in front of us. They want me for the markets. But my daughter, they will kill her because she is too young to sell." Her words made Lura flinch and tighten her grip on her mother's arm. Daniel glanced at the child, and then back at Sirai. "They'll have to get through me first," he said. Daniel pulled a small scanner from his belt and swept it around the doorway. No active signals yet, but it wouldn't be long before the raiders' trackers picked up heat traces. He checked his ammo. One clip for his pistol, half a charge left in his old rifle. Not enough for a fight against a full squad. That meant avoiding direct combat, using the terrain, and keeping quiet. Lura broke the silence, her voice small but steady. "Are you really not a soldier?" she asked again. Daniel shook his head. "Not anymore," he said. "But I know how to keep people alive." The girl nodded once, as if that answer was enough for her. A distant crack echoed through the forest, the sound of a branch breaking. Under heavy boots, Daniel froze, raising his hand for silence, through a gap in the wall. He saw movement, dark figures slipping between the trees. Their armor was black with red markings, their faces hidden by mirrored visors. They were spreading out, scanning the ground, their weapons ready. Daniel turned to Sirai, his voice sharp but quiet. "They're close. We can't stay here." She tried to stand, but her leg gave way instantly. Daniel caught her before she fell. "We'll move slow," he said. "Stay behind me. Hold Lura tight." They slipped out the back of the building, moving deeper into the forest. The air here was colder, the ash on the ground soft and deep. Each step had to be careful. A wrong move could leave a clear footprint for the raiders to follow. Daniel guided them toward a cluster of fallen trees, where the shadows were thick, and the ground was uneven. If they stayed low, they might disappear from the raiders' scanners. They crouched there for several minutes, Daniel watching the tree line, while Sci-Fi held her daughter close. The voices of the raiders drifted through the air, harsh, guttural words in a language Daniel didn't know. Then, the sound of metal striking stone echoed, the kind of noise made when someone planted a device. Daniel's stomach tightened. They weren't just searching. They were marking the area. That meant the raiders were certain someone had been here. They would return with more men after dark. Sarai's face paled. "They've put the hunter's mark," she whispered. "They'll surround this place tonight." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Then we'll be far away before night comes," he said. But inside, he knew the truth. Moving with her injury would be slow, and nightfall was coming fast. Daniel looked at her leg again, then at the forest around them. "We need a brace. Something to help you walk faster," he muttered, scanning the ground for materials. He found a broken metal rod under one of the fallen trees and snapped it to size. From his pack, he pulled out tape and a length of torn cloth. Within minutes, he had built a crude but strong exoskeleton brace. It wouldn't make her fast, but it would let her walk without being carried. He helped her to her feet, tightening the straps. Sci-Fi tested it, wincing at first, but then nodding. "It will hold," she said softly. Daniel gave her a quick nod and looked to Lura. "You stay between us," he told the girl. She nodded, holding both their hands as they moved. The engines in the distance roared again, closer now. The shadows in the forest grew longer as the light began to fade. Daniel's mind raced, planning their next move. He knew one thing for sure: the raiders were hunting them, and there was truly no safe place. The forest grew darker with every step, the burnt trees blocking what little light remained. Daniel led the way, his eyes scanning the shadows, every sense alert. Behind him, Sci-Fi moved carefully on the makeshift brace, her arm around Lura. They moved slowly, but at least they were moving without Daniel carrying them. The sound of engines faded for a moment, replaced by a strange quiet. Daniel knew that silence was not safety. It was the kind of quiet that meant the hunters were close. Through the blackened trunks, he caught glimpses of movement, a shadow passing, then gone. Sci-Fi noticed it too, her hand tightening on Lura's shoulder. "They're circling," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. Daniel stopped beside a large fallen tree. Crouching low, "Stay down," he said, his voice steady. Lura obeyed instantly, her eyes wide but silent. Sci-Fi knelt beside her, wincing as her leg bent. From where he crouched, Daniel could see them now, the raiders, 5 of them, moving in a wide arc through the forest, scanning the ground with small, glowing devices. One of the raiders stopped, kneeling. He pressed a small metallic spike into the ground. It blinked once, then glowed faint red. Daniel's jaw tightened. He had seen that device before. It was a hunter's mark, a signal that told every raider where to come, where the prey had been. Once it was placed, they would never stop until they had taken their target or burned the place to the ground. The raider leader stepped forward. He was massive, a full head taller than the rest. His armor thicker, his weapon heavier. His visor reflected the faint light, hiding his eyes, but showing Daniel's faint reflection. The leader's voice rumbled through the air, speaking in a language Daniel didn't understand. But the tone was clear. It was a command. The raiders nodded and spread out even farther, planting more hunters' marks. Daniel backed away from the log, moving silently towards Sci-Fi. "They've marked this whole area," he whispered. "They'll bring more before nightfall." Sarai's face went pale. "They will burn the forest to smoke us out," she said, her voice trembling. Daniel nodded grimly. "Then we have to be gone before they do." He thought fast, his mind mapping the forest. The only real chance was to get to the ridge on the far side. If they could reach the abandoned comms relay there, they might be able to call for help. But it meant crossing open ground, a deadly risk with hunters so close. Still, staying here was certain death. Daniel looked at Sarai's brace. "It will hold?" he asked. She nodded, though her eyes showed the pain she was hiding. He turned to Lura. "You stay right between us, no matter what happens," he said. Lura nodded. Clutching her mother's hand tight, they began moving again, keeping low. Weaving between the trees, Daniel's boots made almost no sound on the soft ash. Every few steps, he glanced back to be sure they weren't being followed too closely. But the raiders were not rushing. They were patient. They knew their prey was trapped, and they were tightening the circle. Half an hour later, Daniel spotted the first break in the trees. Beyond it lay a slope leading to open ground, the ridge rising in the distance. The comms relay was just visible, a metal tower, leaning but still standing. But the ground between them and the ridge was dangerous, flat, no cover. Crossing it would expose them completely. Daniel crouched beside Sarai. "We'll have to run for it," he said. "Once we start, we don't stop." Sarai glanced at the open space, and then at Lura. "She cannot run that far," she whispered. Daniel thought for a moment, then removed the strap from his rifle. He tied it across his chest, making a sling. "Hold her to me," he told Sarai. She lifted Lura carefully, setting her against Daniel's back. The girl wrapped her arms around his neck. Holding tight, they waited for the right moment. Through the trees, they saw the raiders moving in the opposite direction, their backs turned. Daniel's voice was a low growl. Now, they burst from the trees, ash spraying under their feet. Sarai limped beside Daniel, forcing herself to keep up despite the pain. The wind was cold on their faces, the ridge getting closer, with every step behind them. Shouts rang out. The raiders had spotted them, weapons fired, beams of red energy cutting through the air. The ground exploded near Daniel's foot, spraying dirt and ash. He pushed harder, his lungs burning. Lura held tight, her face buried against his shoulder. Sarai stumbled once, nearly falling, but Daniel caught her arm without breaking stride. The comms relay was only a few dozen meters away now. The shouts behind them grew louder. Daniel risked a glance back. The raiders were closing fast, their heavy boots pounding the ground. They reached the base of the relay. Diving behind its rusted support beams, Daniel set Lura down and swung his rifle around. Sarai leaned against the metal, gasping for breath. The raiders slowed, forming a line. They weren't rushing in, they were surrounding them. The leader raised his hand, signaling for the others to hold. Then he pointed straight at Daniel. The meaning was clear. They weren't here to kill him yet. They wanted to take him alive. Daniel's grip tightened on his weapon. If they thought he would go quietly, they were wrong. The air around the comms relay was thick with tension. Daniel could hear the faint hum of the tower's old power lines, still alive after all these years. The raiders stood just beyond the open ground, waiting, their weapons pointed but not firing. They were in no hurry. They believed their prey was trapped. Daniel knew staying here would only end one way. They had to move, and fast. He leaned close to Sarai, speaking low. "There's a path through the dead forest behind the ridge," he said. "It's dangerous, but it might be the only way to lose them." Sarai's silver eyes flickered with doubt. "Dangerous how?" she asked. Daniel's voice stayed calm. "Things live there. Things even the raiders avoid." Lura shivered at his words, but she didn't speak. Daniel quickly slung his rifle, grabbed Sarai's arm, and nodded toward the far side of the ridge. They moved fast, slipping behind the tower, and down a narrow path covered in ash and broken rock. The slope was steep, forcing Sarai to lean on Daniel for balance. The sound of the raiders faded slightly, replaced by the eerie silence of the dead forest. The trees here were massive, their blackened trunks twisted into unnatural shapes. Their branches reached out like claws, scraping against each other in the wind. The ground was uneven, covered with thick ash that hid deep holes and jagged roots. Daniel slowed their pace, forcing every step to be careful. A wrong move could mean a twisted ankle, or worse. They walked deeper, the light growing dim. A faint mist hung low to the ground, swirling around their legs. Daniel could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching them. Laura stayed close between them, her small hand gripping Daniel's belt. "Don't look into the mist," Sci-Fi whispered suddenly. Daniel glanced at her. "Why?" "It hides shapes, and if you follow them, you never come back," she said. Something cracked in the distance, a sharp sound, like a branch breaking. Daniel raised a hand for silence. The forest went still, even the wind seemed to stop. Then came the low growl, deep and slow. Laura's grip on him tightened. "What is that?" Daniel asked quietly. Sarai's voice trembled. "A night stalker. They hunt in packs." The growl grew louder, joined by another from the opposite side. Daniel's eyes swept the shadows, catching glimpses of movement, low shapes slipping between the trees. The raiders had not followed them in, but something else had. Daniel crouched low, pulling his pistol. "Stay close," he said, his voice sharp. He picked a direction, slightly uphill, toward a cluster of fallen logs. If they could get there, maybe they could create a barrier. They moved quickly, but carefully. The shapes followed, their eyes faintly glowing in the dim light. One of the creatures stepped into view for just a second. It was large, with a long, low body and limbs that bent in strange angles. Its mouth was filled with jagged teeth. Its skin stretched tight over bone, then it vanished back into the mist. They reached the logs and climbed over them. Daniel turned and fired into the mist, not to hit anything, but to scare them back. The gunshots echoed through the trees, and for a moment the glowing eyes faded into the shadows. He used the brake to push them forward. Deeper into the forest, the ground began to slope down again. In the distance, Daniel could hear running. "Water, river," he said. Sarai nodded quickly. "If we can cross, they may not follow." They hurried toward the sound, the mist growing thinner as they neared the water. The river came into view, wide, fast-moving, its dark surface reflecting the faint light from above. Daniel scanned both banks. A narrow fallen tree lay across part of the river. It wasn't perfect, but it might hold their weight. He tested the log. It shifted slightly, but stayed in place. "You first," he told Sarai. She shook her head. "No, you go with Laura. I will follow." Daniel didn't argue. There was no time. He lifted Laura and stepped carefully onto the log, moving slow but steady. The current roared beneath them, carrying broken branches and debris halfway across. Daniel heard it, a splash from the far bank. One of the night stalkers had tried to cross downstream. Laura buried her face against his shoulder. Daniel quickened his pace, reaching the far side and setting her down. He turned back just as Sarai was halfway across. Another splash sounded, this one closer. A dark shape lunged from the water, teeth snapping. Daniel fired twice, the shots echoing across the forest. The creature fell back into the river. Carried away by the current, Sarai made it across, breathing hard. Daniel grabbed her arm, pulling her into the trees on the far side. They kept moving until the sound of the river faded. Only then did they stop, leaning against a massive trunk. The forest here was quieter, but the danger wasn't gone. Daniel checked their items, then looked at surroundings, then looked at some time. He said, "But the raiders will try to cut us off ahead." Sarai nodded, her eyes determined. "Then we must reach the mountains before they do." Daniel glanced at Laura, who was already drifting to sleep against her mother's side. He knew the girl was exhausted, but the hunt was far from over. The forest began to thin as they climbed. Daniel pushed forward, each step heavy with the weight of time slipping away. Above the blackened trees, a faint metal glint caught his eye, the top of an old comms relay. It rose like a skeleton against the darkening sky. They were close now, but the ridge leading to it was steep and exposed. Sarai leaned heavily on the brace Daniel had made. Her breath came in short bursts, but she never complained. Laura clung to her mother's hand, her small legs struggling to keep up. Daniel slowed his pace just enough to keep them together. Every few steps, he scanned the tree line behind them. The forest was quiet, too quiet. And that silence carried a weight Daniel knew well. It meant the hunters were close. When they reached the base of the ridge, Daniel crouched low. "From here on, we're in the open," he whispered. Sarai's gaze followed the long slope up to the tower. Her eyes narrowed. "They will see us," she said. Daniel nodded once. "Probably. But once we reach it, I can send a signal." He didn't add the rest, that he didn't know if anyone was even listening. They began the climb. The ground loose with ash and rock. Daniel kept Lura close beside him, guiding her over the rough terrain. Halfway up, a sound broke the stillness, the distant roar of engines. Daniel's stomach tightened. The raiders were back, and they were coming fast. "Move," he said sharply, his voice low but urgent. The last stretch to the tower felt longer than it was. The sun had almost vanished behind the horizon, casting the land in deep shadow. When they finally reached the base, Daniel wasted no time. The relay's door was rusted shut, but he kicked it open, sending a cloud of dust into the air. Inside, the small control room was dim and cold. The panels were coated in grime, wires hanging loose. Daniel's fingers worked quickly, pulling open a cracked access panel. He bypassed a fried circuit and rerouted power from the emergency cell. The faint hum of the transmitter came alive. A weak green light blinked on the control board. Sirai stepped inside, looking around the cramped space. "Will it work?" she asked. Daniel didn't look up. "It has to," he said. He tapped a sequence on the screen. Emergency broadcast. Human distress code. Open channel. His voice was steady as he leaned into the microphone. "This is Daniel Cross, human survivor on Grid 96 Alpha, requesting immediate extraction." He repeated it twice, then switched to a repeating loop. The signal light flickered with each transmission, but the static in the speakers told him the range was weak. Laura climbed onto the edge of the console, watching him. "Will they come for us?" she asked. Daniel hesitated before answering. "If they hear us, they will," he said. The girl seemed to accept that, resting her head against her mother's arm. Then the sound came faint at first, but growing louder. Engines, the raiders, had found them. Daniel moved to the doorway and peered down the ridge. Dark shapes were moving through the trees below. He could see the glow of their visors. They were spreading out again, but this time faster, more urgent. "They know we're here," he said, stepping back inside. Sarai's voice was tight. "Can we hold them off until help comes?" Daniel glanced at his pistol. One clip, his rifle, half a charge. Not enough for a stand. "No, but we can slow them," he said. He moved outside, setting a small explosive charge at the narrowest part of the ridge path. It wasn't powerful, just enough to throw rock and dust. Buy them a few more minutes. As he worked, the raider leader's voice rang out from below. It was deep, commanding. Daniel couldn't understand the words, but he understood the intent. The leader was calling for their surrender. Daniel returned to the control room. "They want us alive," he said. Sirai's eyes hardened. "Then they will take me first," she said, "and my daughter will die." Daniel shook his head. "Not while I'm breathing," he said, his voice low. The engines roared closer, the ground trembling under heavy boots. Daniel took position at the doorway, rifle raised. He fired the first shot, hitting one of the raiders and sending the others into cover. Return fire lit up the ridge, red beams slicing through the air. Inside, Sirai pulled Lura against her, shielding her with her own body. The comms relay continued its weak, steady broadcast. Somewhere, far above the planet, maybe a ship was listening, or maybe they were alone. A sudden blast shook the ground as Daniel triggered the ridge charge. Rocks tumbled down, forcing the raiders to halt their advance. It wouldn't stop them for long. Daniel reloaded his pistol. "Time to move," he said. Sarai's eyes widened. "Move where?" Daniel pointed toward the far side of the relay. There's a drop into the canyon. It'll slow them down more than we can hear. He lifted Lura into his arms and guided Sarai toward the back exit. The sounds of the raiders' voices grew louder again. The leader's shout cut through the chaos, and Daniel knew they would not stop. Not until they had them. The canyon dropped steeply away from the back of the comms relay. Loose rocks slid under Daniel's boots as he led. The way down, Lura clung tightly to his neck, her small body trembling. Sarai followed close behind, her injured leg slowing her butt, her grip on the rock firm above them. Shouts rang out as the raiders reached the relay. The heavy thud of their boots echoed against the canyon walls. Daniel pushed them forward, along a narrow path carved into the cliffside. The air here was colder, damp with the smell of water. He could hear the sound of rushing current growing louder with every step. The path widened suddenly, opening onto a stretch of riverbank. The water was fast and deep, white foam swirling over jagged rocks. Daniel knew crossing it would be dangerous, but it was their only chance. "Stay here," he told Sarai, setting Lura down beside her. He scanned the area. A fallen tree lay partly in the water, forming a narrow bridge to the far side. It was slick and unstable, but it could work. Sarai followed his gaze, her voice tense. "They'll be here before we all get across." Daniel nodded. "Which is why you're going first." He helped her step onto the log, holding her hand until she found her balance. "Go slow, but don't stop," he said. Lura followed, clutching her mother's side. Daniel stayed on the bank, rifle in hand. The sound of movement above made him glance up. Raiders were appearing at the top of the canyon, their weapons catching the fading light. "Faster," he called to Sarai. The first shot came, striking the water near Daniel's feet. He returned fire, forcing the raiders to take cover. Sarai and Lura were halfway across now, the log creaking under their weight. A burst of red energy sizzled past, striking the fallen tree and sending splinters into the air. Daniel gritted his teeth and kept firing, aiming to slow them rather than kill. Every second counted. The raider leader stepped forward, his heavy frame unmistakable. He raised his weapon, but instead of firing at Daniel, he aimed at the log. Daniel saw it coming and shifted his fire toward the leader. The shot struck the raider's shoulder, knocking him back. It wasn't enough to drop him, but it bought more time. Sarai reached the far bank, helping Lura climb onto solid ground. Daniel's chest loosened slightly, but he wasn't done yet. He knew if the raiders crossed, they'd take Sarai and Lura, so he made a choice. He dropped his empty rifle, drew his pistol, and stepped forward onto the riverbank, planting himself between the log and the approaching enemies. The first raider tried to cross. Daniel fired twice, dropping him into the churning water. Another jumped down onto the bank, swinging a blade. Daniel sidestepped, kicking the weapon away before shooting him in the leg. The raider fell, clutching the wound. The leader roared an order, and two more raiders rushed forward. Daniel fired again, hitting one in the chest plate, the impact knocking him back. The other closed the gap, swinging the butt of his rifle. The blow struck Daniel's side, sending pain shooting through his ribs. He staggered, but stayed on his feet, shoving the attacker into the river. Across the water, Sarai called out, "Daniel, come now." But he shook his head. "Not yet." He shouted back. His focus stayed on the bank. Every moment he held here was another moment they were farther away. The raider leader jumped down, landing heavily on the rocks. His weapon hummed with a high-pitched whine as it charged. Daniel fired his last 3 rounds, the shots striking the leader's armor and staggering him, but not dropping him. The pistol clicked empty. Daniel tossed it aside, pulling his knife. The leader advanced, swinging his weapon in a wide arc. Daniel ducked under the swing, driving his blade into a gap in the armor. The leader roared, shoving him back with brutal force. Daniel hit the ground hard, the breath knocked from his lungs, above the roar of the river. He heard Sarai's voice again, but now it was mixed with another sound. Engines, not the deep growl of raider transports, but the sharp whine of a different kind. Daniel glanced up toward the sky. Through the fading light, a dark shape descended, a dropship. Its searchlights cut across the canyon, blinding the raiders. A voice boomed from its loudspeakers. Human distress signal confirmed. Hold position. The raiders hesitated, their leader turning toward the ship. Daniel used a moment to scramble backward onto the log. The dropship's guns opened fire, sending the raiders diving for cover. Daniel crossed the log in quick, unsteady steps, nearly slipping into the rushing water. Sci-Fi was waiting on the far side, pulling him the last few feet onto solid ground. Lura threw her arms around his neck. "You came back," she whispered. Daniel's chest burned, his body aching, but he managed a faint smile. "Of course I did," he said. Above them, the dropship hovered, lowering its ramp. It was time to leave this place behind. But Daniel knew the danger wasn't over yet. The dropship's engines roared above them, sending ripples across the rushing river. The ramp lowered slowly, its metal frame shining in the pale evening light. Daniel kept his arm around Sarai's shoulders as they stepped forward. Lura held his free hand tightly, as if letting go would make him disappear. Two human marines in dark armor appeared at the edge of the ramp. Their weapons were raised toward the canyon, scanning for threats. One of them shouted over the noise, "Move! Get on board!" Daniel guided Sci-Fi up the ramp first, keeping himself between her and the forest, even as they climbed. He could still hear the faint shouts of the raiders in the distance. They weren't chasing anymore. The dropship's heavy guns made sure of that. But Daniel knew they'd remember this day, and they'd remember him. Inside, the cabin was dim but warm. Sci-Fi sank onto one of the bench seats, her body shaking from exhaustion. Lura immediately climbed into her lap, curling against her as if afraid she might vanish. Daniel leaned against the wall. Catching his breath, the pilot's voice came through the intercom. "Hold on, we're taking off." The dropship lifted smoothly, the roar of the engines echoing through the hull. Through a small window, Daniel watched the blackened forest fall away beneath them. A medic appeared, crouching beside Sci-Fi. He examined her leg, his hands gentle but quick. "This wound needs proper treatment, but she'll be all right," he said. Sci-Fi met Daniel's eyes for a moment, then looked away, her expression unreadable. When the medic moved to check Daniel, he waved him off at first, but the man was insistent. Under the torn fabric of Daniel's jacket, deep bruises and cuts painted his skin. "Lucky you're still standing," the medic muttered. Wrapping his ribs, Daniel just grunted, his eyes drifting back to Sci-Fi and Lura. For several minutes, no one spoke. The hum of the engines, and the occasional crackle from the pilots. Radio filled the silence, then Sci-Fi's voice broke it. "You could have left us," she said quietly. Daniel shook his head. That was never going to happen. Her silver eyes lifted to meet his, shimmering with something between gratitude and disbelief. "On my world," she said slowly, "debts like this are bound by life." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What does that mean?" "It means," she said, her voice firming, "that my life and my child's life belong to you now, until the debt is repaid." Lura sat up, looking between them. "That means we stay with him, right?" she asked. Sci-Fi nodded once. Daniel gave a faint, tired smile. "You don't owe me anything," he said, but Sci-Fi's expression didn't soften. "In my heart," she replied, "I will always owe you everything." The dropship banked sharply. The view outside, shifting to reveal the faint lights of a human outpost in the distance. It was small, but to Daniel, it looked like a fortress. The pilot's voice came through again. "Approaching Haven Outpost, prepare for landing." As they descended, Sci-Fi's hand reached out and took Daniel's without a word. Her grip was strong despite the bandages on her leg. Lura leaned against his other side, her head resting on his arm, for the first time in days. Daniel felt the tension in his chest ease, not because the danger was gone, but because they were here together. The dropship touched down with a soft jolt. The ramp lowered again, revealing the outpost bathed in the glow of floodlights. Soldiers and medics waited at the bottom. Daniel stepped out first, helping Sarai down. Lura stayed between them, clutching both their hands. The outpost commander, a tall woman in a gray coat, approached. Sarai of the Valen, she said respectfully, we received word of your people's attack. You're safe now. Sarai inclined her head. This human is the reason we are safe, she said firmly, gesturing to Daniel. The commander's gaze shifted to him. Then I owe you thanks as well, she said. Daniel just nodded. I was in the right place at the right time, he replied. But Sarai stepped closer to him, her voice carrying a quiet certainty. No, she said, you were in the place you chose to be, and that is why we are alive. That night, the outpost gave them a room, small, warm, and safe. Daniel sat by the window while the medics worked on Sarai's leg. Lura curled up under a blanket nearby, already asleep, when the room was quiet. Again, Sarai spoke. Tomorrow, when you leave, we will come with you. Daniel turned to her. You don't have to, I do, she interrupted softly. You risked your life for us. My people believe such a bond cannot be broken. Her eyes held his, without wavering, and I don't want it to be. Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked at Lura, her small form rising and falling with each breath, then back at Sarai, whose gaze was steady and unflinching. Finally, he nodded. All right, he said, his voice low. We'll figure it out together. Sarai's lips curved in the faintest smile. Together, she echoed. Outside, the night was quiet, the stars stretching endlessly above the outpost walls. For the first time since the battlefield, Daniel felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Hope.